Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gripe, the show where I do short, sweet reviews of new release movies, plus the one thing that annoyed me the most. And today I'm going to be talking about Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight. Now, this was a movie that was interesting in how it was filmed, and the location was done. It was done here in Colorado for the most part, which I thought was kind of cool. And but what was interesting about how it was filmed is it was done in 70 millimeter Panavision, which is something that hasn't been done in a long time. It hasn't been done since the 60s. And even then, it wasn't something that was very common just because the difficulty of the film, the filmmaking process itself with 70 millimeter. But Quentin Tarantino, because he's definitely one of those like historical kind of film buffs, you could see Ennio Morricone and, these kung fu, masters and samurai, movies like Akira Kurosawa and all these like fantastic directors from the 60s and 70s that he's always kind of gone back to and look and relied on them for inspiration. So obviously in creating this story, he wanted to give you that immersive epic experience, even though the movie itself is very small and intimate in a lot of ways. So just to kind of give you an idea of what the movie's about is it's a western that takes place in Wyoming in the wintertime, and this stagecoach is, making they're trying to make it to um, basically, a town, and there's a huge snowstorm kind of coming their way. And as they're going, they come across this, guy whose horse basically died, and he's, sitting out there in the snow, just like, hey, can you give me a ride? Played by Samuel L. Jackson. And inside the coach is a bounty hunter played by Kurt Russell, who's taking a prisoner to this town basically to stand trial and ultimately hang for her crimes. And it's the character's played by Jennifer Jason Leigh. And so, as they kind of come together and they pick up another guy, who's also, on his way to this town, you start to learn a little bit more about who these people are. And this is, the whole like premise of this movie just screams Quentin Tarantino. I am a huge Quentin Tarantino fan, so to, kind of see his, style done here, it's very similar. I mean, even just the way the movie begins almost reminds you of the beginning of Django Unchained, but it definitely goes in obviously a different direction from that. And there's obviously this, tension just kind of hanging over the whole thing because Kurt Russell is looking at, Samuel L. Jackson and Walton Goggins in the stagecoach, basically saying, okay, the two of you, I don't know you two well enough to say that you're not going to try to kill me and take my bounty because this woman that he's taking to stand trial is worth quite a bit of money. And, they don't really explain why or anything like that. They just kind of say, this is it. This is the way it's going to be. And because the snowstorm starts to get really bad, they have to stop at this haberdashery, as they call it. Just basically a board house supply chain place. That's on their way to this town in Wyoming. And when they get there, there's a couple other people who are sitting there. There's like a southern, a general from the Confederacy. There's, this English guy who calls himself the Hangman, who is allegedly going to be the one who hangs this woman if she is found guilty. Another guy who's supposedly going back to his, mom, and then this, very interesting Mexican character that they just call Bob, who's played by Demian Bichir, and he's an interesting, just like, when he first shows up, you're not sure what to make of him. In fact, you're not sure what to make of any of them, which is the entire point of the movie, is you have these 8 strangers who are now, locked in this cabin during a snowstorm, and, Kurt Russell doesn't trust any of them because he's carrying a high value person, high value bounty, and he doesn't know who any of these people are. And the movie is, they kind of try, is they sort of flush out who some of these people are and what their motivations are because, Kurt Russell really is of the mindset that somebody in there is either going to betray them and take his bounty, or even that somebody is working with this woman to, set her free, kill everybody and set her free. But because, they're trapped in this house during a blizzard, there's really not a lot that they can do to, they either have to live together or somebody's going to get killed. And, there's a lot of obviously growing tension. Samuel L. Jackson basically kills the general. Not to really spoil anything, but he basically kills the general, during this conversation to make it this kind of justified thing. So you know that the general is obviously not somebody who is, um, he's not gonna betray anybody. And all the while, Samuel L. Jackson is kind of like making note of little details that he sees around this house because he's been out there. He's basically a bounty hunter himself, and he has all of these. He's been here. He kind of knows the way that this place is, and you can tell he sees things are off, and so he just kind of one by one starts to address these people, these strangers. And the movie has an intermission, and then after intermission, the movie changes. It goes from this kind of like interesting mystery story to just a flat out, just like crazy bloodbath. And it's like Quentin Tarantino. This is like the two faces of Quentin Tarantino, the guy who can craft these like really intimate, interesting, conversational moments, these dialogues and things like that, and then just I can't snap. Close enough. Basically, to create an absolute chaotic, violent scene. I mean, that's what Quentin Tarantino does. Is he has this like mix of like almost theatrical playwriting with just horrifically brutal violence. And this movie is no exception. It's maybe on a much smaller scale than something like Django or Inglourious Bastards, but it's reminiscent of like the Pulp Fictions of the world, where you have these really violent moments mixed in with comedy and mystery and all these other things that are going on, that he crafts with his dialogue. And without giving away the ending, it does kind of get to this sort of point of there's this like kind of strong frontier morality that hits at the very end of the movie. It's like, okay, what do we do in a situation like this where there's all this death and all this like mistrust and betrayal and all this stuff going on? How do these people kind of fit this into justice, or is this justice? Like, what happens in this cabin? Is this justice for people like this, people with dark pasts and things, people with harsh motives and things like that? So there's certainly a lot of those questions. Where do I rank it in terms of, because obviously, like I said, I'm a huge fan of Quentin Tarantino. Where do I rank it in terms of Quentin Tarantino movies? Probably not among the top five, because as good as beautifully done as this movie is, for one, the dialogue actually seems a little bit forced at times, and there's something that Quentin Tarantino, his dialogue sometimes does feel forced. There's points in Inglourious Bastards where it's you think of that opening scene in Inglourious Bastards, which is a fantastic scene, and it's a very tense, but there is a little bit of forced dialogue just to keep that tension going. In this movie, it almost seems it's a little bit choppy, and maybe that's the delivery from the actors, or maybe it is the writing itself. I don't know, but it just felt a little bit forced at times. And then when you get into the violence of it, it almost goes from kind of interesting and mysterious to somewhat cheesy, which you can say about Quentin Tarantino, the Kill Bills of the world and stuff like that just get really, really cheesy at times. But he obviously does it well. So what is my key gripe from this movie? And my key gripe here is that I don't think that he actually had the point that he wanted to make. I think he tried to make a point, and the way that the movie ends, it kind of is like, this is my point. But I don't think he did that very well. I think that the way the movie ends is kind of, I mean, it's necessary for the movie, but I do think the ending is extremely weak. I think the ending just gives you this like, well, that's all there is to it. Good night, everybody. And the way that he's built this story, he kind of loses the mystery as you start to learn more about these characters. And it's almost like the two sides of Intermission are two completely different movies. And the first movie works really well. The second movie is kind of a mess, and not just in terms of what you see on screen with the blood and the gore and all that stuff, but it just doesn't seem to flow nearly as well as the first half does. And I think is a very weak finish for a guy who, has had some fantastic finishes to his movies. Inglorious Bastards, great ending. Just like it's so out there, just a great ending. Pulp Fiction, one of my favorite endings. How that movie ends is just perfect. But it ends with your Mexican standoff kind of thing, which Quentin Tarantino loves so much. It ends with a lot of vague morality, but it doesn't really. I don't think it necessarily captured what it needed to capture, what they were trying to say. I don't know if he conveyed it very well. So my key gripe is just with the way the movie ended. I don't think that it ended as well as it could have with the story that they were building up to it. I didn't feel the impact at the ending. It, and maybe that's the point. Maybe the point is that you're supposed to walk away from it going, I don't know how to feel about this. But then again, he's ended movies with such excellent impacts before, and this one just kind of even weirder than Django doing, this weird little horse dance, at the end after blowing up a plantation house. It just doesn't feel complete. It feels like he just kind of just said, oh, I'm done, and ended it. Um, so, that's kind of my key gripe of the movie. Overall, though, I mean, it's a pretty well done movie, and obviously, watching it in 70 millimeter was gorgeous. It's a beautifully done movie. The shot on location in Telluride, Colorado. It looks great. It looks like a great movie, and it has certain parts that are fantastic, but for Quentin, I think it was a slight step forward in terms of his filmmaking ability, but also a slight step back in terms of his abilities as a writer. And I think, hopefully he's learned, stuff from every experience, and he should be proud of this movie. But I just don't think it's definitely one of his top movies. So I'd give it an 8 out of 10 um, as my rating. So that's my review of Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight, and hopefully you can go see it, listen to Ennio Morricone's fantastic score, and enjoy it, or don't, because that's the way it is with Quentin Tarantino movies. It's one or the other. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.